out in the blood-soaked dust of the Arizona territory, where life was cheap and survival was a prayer whispered into a merciless sky, a legend was born. Not from the barrel of a 6-gun or the flash of a prospector's gold, but from the hands of a girl barely old enough to be called a woman. For 40 days and 40 nights, with nothing but grit and a single canteen, she tended to a dying enemy, an Apache chief left for dead. What happened when he finally opened his eyes would change the fate of the frontier, forever proving that the greatest power in the West wasn't lead or steel, but a touch that could heal a soul or break it. This is the story of Helena O'Connell and the sacred power she never asked for. The year was 1878. The Arizona sun was a merciless god hammering the cracked earth of the San Simon Valley into a shimmering anvil. For 16-year-old Helena O'Connell, it was the only god she had left. 3 weeks prior, the simple wooden crosses marking the graves of her parents, Patrick and Mary O'Connell, had been the last monument to her old life. Cholera, the Blue Death, had moved faster than their wagon, leaving Helena orphaned, in a land that cared little for the living and even less for the alone. She was following the faint wagon ruts west towards a town marked on her father's map as Redemption Gulch. Hope was a dwindling resource scarcer than the water in her canteen. Her world had shrunk to the burning sky, the endless horizon, and the gnawing ache in her belly. It was on the 3rd day of her solitary journey that she found him. He was laid out beneath a gnarled mesquite tree, a place where the shade was more a memory than a reality. At first, she thought he was a bundle of discarded hides. Then she saw the glint of a silver armband on a sinewy, dark-skinned arm. He was Apache. The word itself was a terror whispered in the settlements with tales of raids and savagery. Her father had taught her to fear them, to see them not as men, but as a hostile force of nature, like a flash flood or a dust storm. But this force of nature was dying. A deep, ragged gash ran from his collarbone down his chest, crudely stitched with what looked like yucca fiber, but now festering the flesh around it, an angry purple. His breathing was a shallow rasp, a death rattle in waiting. His face, though caked in dried blood and dust, was noble-etched with the lines of a life lived under the open sky. He was older, perhaps, 50 seasons, his long black hair threaded with grey. Even in his unconscious state, he possessed an aura of command. This was no mere warrior. This was a leader. Fear screamed at Helena to run. Every instinct, every cautionary tale told her to leave him to the vultures that were already circling high above. He was the enemy. His people were the reason settlers like her family fortified their wagons and slept with rifles by their sides. She took a step back, then another. Her worn leather boot scuffed the gravel. She could be in Redemption Gulch in 2 days, maybe 3. She could find work, a new life. She could forget this man, this spectre of death in the desert. But then a low moan escaped his lips. It wasn't a sound of aggression or hate. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated suffering. It was the same sound her mother had made in her final hours. Helena stopped. The ghost of her mother's hand seemed to rest on her shoulder. Mary O'Connell had been a woman of quiet, unshakable faith. There is no soul beyond God's grace. Helena, she used to say, her hands kneading dough, and there is no suffering that compassion cannot touch. Looking at the dying Apache chief, Helena saw not an enemy, but a man at the precipice of the same void that had swallowed her family. Leaving him here wasn't survival. It felt like a second betrayal, a betrayal of the memory of her parents' decency. Her decision was not a thought, but a feeling, a deep seismic shift in her soul. She knelt. Her hands trembled as she uncorked her precious canteen. She tore a strip from the hem of her petticoat, soaked it, and began to clean his face. His skin was hot as a furnace. Gently, she wiped away the grime, revealing the strong jaw, the high cheekbones, the proud eagle's beak of a nose. For the first day and night, she did nothing but give him water drop by precious drop, moistening his cracked lips. On the second day she tackled the wound. Her stomach churned, but she steeled herself. Using the small knife her father had given her, she carefully cut the crude stitches. A wave of foulness washed over her, but she didn't flinch. She used nearly half her remaining water to flush the infection, cleaning it as best she could with strips of her own clothing. She knew a little of herbs, things her mother had taught her for fevers and cuts. She found creosote bushes, known for their cleansing properties, and mashed the leaves into a poultice to pack the wound. She found a prickly pear cactus, and using 2 flat rocks, she carefully burned off the needles, slicing the pad open to get to the soothing gel-like flesh inside which she applied to his fevered brow. The days bled into one another, a grueling cycle of sun and stars. Her own hunger became a constant, dull companion. She learned to forage, finding edible roots and bitter berries that stained her lips but kept her alive. She set simple snares, catching a single scrawny rabbit that felt like a banquet from the Lord himself. The nearby dry wash held a secret, a place where the sand was damp. She dug for hours with her bare hands, eventually reaching a trickle of muddy, life-giving water. This became their lifeline. Every morning and every evening without fail, she would bathe him. She would clean the wound, change the poultice, and gently wash his body. It became a ritual, a sacred, silent communion between the orphaned Irish girl and the dying Apache chief. She spoke to him, filling the vast silence with stories of her life in Missouri, of her father's booming laugh and her mother's gentle lullabies. She didn't know if he could hear her, but it didn't matter. In talking to him, she was keeping a part of herself alive, too. The settlers had a saying, "The only good Apache is a dead Apache." But as her hands cleaned his body as she fought for his life, she saw the scars of older battles, the strength in his limbs, the humanity in the unconscious flicker of his eyelids. She was not nursing an enemy. She was nursing a man. Days turned into weeks. 10 days. 20. 30. The vultures gave up and flew away. The chief remained suspended between life and death. Helena grew gaunt, her skin burned brown by the sun, her dress tattered, but her eyes held a new kind of fire. It was the fierce, unwavering resolve of a guardian. On the morning of the 40th day, a change occurred. The blistering heat of his fever, a constant presence for weeks, had finally broken. His skin was cool to the touch. The ragged wound on his chest was no longer an angry maw. It was a clean, healing line, the new pink skin knitting itself together in a way that seemed almost miraculous. Helena sat back on her heels, exhausted, but filled with a fragile, fluttering hope. She dipped a cloth in the hard-won water and brought it to his lips, as she had 100 times before. And then it happened. His eyes, black as obsidian, snapped open. They were not dull or clouded, but sharp, intelligent, and utterly aware. They fixed on her not with confusion, but with an unnerving, ancient intensity. His hand, surprisingly strong, shot out and clamped around her wrist. Helena froze, her heart leaping into her throat. This was it. She had saved him, and now he would kill her. The terror she had kept at bay for 40 days came flooding back, but there was no violence in his grip. His thumb moved slowly, deliberately over the pulse point on her wrist. He stared at her, his gaze seeming to pierce through her skin, through her very bones, reading the story of her 40-day vigil. He saw the exhaustion, the sacrifice, the fear she had conquered. His lips, still chapped, parted. A single word spoken in a voice like rocks grinding together echoed in the silent desert. "Shiaji," he rasped, "my child." And in that moment, as his hand held hers, a strange warmth bloomed in Helena's chest, a tingling energy that spread from his touch up her arm and through her entire body. It was like a dormant river suddenly finding its current. Something ancient and profound had passed between them. The 40-day ordeal was over. A new and far more dangerous chapter had just begun. The man's name was Gochin. In his people's tongue, it meant the wind that scatters a name, earned for the way he had once moved his warriors like the unpredictable desert wind, confounding the blue-coat soldiers. He was, as Helena had suspected, a chief of the Chiricahua Apache. Communication was a slow, painstaking process. Gochin's English was limited to a few dozen words learned from broken treaties and violent encounters. Helena's Apache was non-existent. They spoke through gestures, through drawings in the sand, through the universal language of survival. He taught her the real names of the plants she had used to save him, showing her how to prepare them with greater potency. He pointed out the tracks of a coyote, the flight path of a hawk, teaching her to read the desert as a living book. In turn, Helena taught him words. Water, sun, heal, friend. The day he was strong enough to sit up on his own, he told her his story in a halting mix of Apache words and evocative gestures. He and a small party of his best warriors had been heading to a secret council with other clans. They were ambushed, not by soldiers but by white men who were not wearing uniforms, ranchers by the look of their gear. They fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Gochin was shot from his horse, the bullet tearing through his chest. Believing him dead or dying, his attackers had moved on, more interested in whatever prize had led them to this betrayal. His warriors were scattered dead or captured. He had been left for the sun and the scavengers. As he spoke, he would often pause and look at Helena, a deep, unreadable expression in his eyes. He would sometimes take her hand, his calloused fingers tracing the lines on her palm. When he did, that same peculiar warmth would flood her senses. It was calming, yet energizing. The first true test of this strange connection came a week after he awoke. While climbing a rock face to get a better view of the valley, Helena slipped. She tumbled 10 feet, landing hard. A sharp, searing pain shot through her left ankle. When she tried to stand, the agony was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. It was broken, or at least badly sprained. Out here, a lame leg was a death sentence. Gochin was at her side in an instant. He examined the rapidly swelling ankle with an expert's touch. His face was grim. He helped her back to their small camp, his strength a stark contrast to the wreck she had found weeks ago. He laid her down and then sat facing her. He said nothing. He closed his eyes, his lips moving in a silent chant. Then he placed his hands on her injured ankle. His palms were not hot, but they radiated a profound, penetrating energy that was more than mere heat. Helena gasped. The throbbing, sharp-edged pain didn't just dull. It felt like it was being drawn out, unspooled from her flesh like thread from a bobbin. The sensation was unnerving, deeply intimate. Under his hands, she could feel the swelling begin to recede, the frantic, panicked pulse in her ankle slowing to a steady, calm rhythm. She watched wide-eyed as the angry, purple bruising seemed to lighten, shifting to a dull blue. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, he removed his hands. He was sweating, and his breathing was heavy, as if he had just run a great distance. The effort had cost him something. "Stand," he said, his English simple and direct. Hesitantly, Helena put her foot down. She put weight on it. There was still a dull ache, a ghost of the injury, but the sharp, incapacitating pain was gone. She could stand. She could walk. It was impossible. It defied all logic, all reason. She looked from her ankle to his face, her expression a mixture of awe and fear. "How?" she whispered. Gochin looked at her hands, then back at her eyes. 40 days, he said, his voice heavy with meaning. "You wash spirit. My spirit. Your spirit. They touch. Now they are one. The power that heals the earth is in you. I do not give it. I wake it." He called it Izi Nadlehe, the changing spirit. He explained that such a thing was rare, a gift from Usen the Creator. It was not a power to be commanded, like a horse or a rifle. It was a current to be guided, a partnership with the life force that flowed through all things. He said her act of selfless compassion, of caring for an enemy, when every law of her people told her not to, had purified her spirit and made it a vessel for this power. Her touch had saved his life, and in doing so, it had awakened a dormant seed within her own soul. His touch had not healed her. It had acted as a catalyst, allowing the power, now residing in her, to heal herself. The revelation was terrifying. Stories of witches and hexes were common fuel for fear and persecution. To have such an ability, it wasn't a gift, it was a brand, a mark that could get her hanged or burned. Sensing her fear, Gochin grew stern. "Power is a mountain lion," he gestured. "It can feed you or it can eat you. You must learn its ways. You must be its master, not its slave." And so her second education began. It was no longer just about survival. Gochin taught her focus and control. He had her place her hands on a wilted desert flower, urging her to feel its thirst and extend her own energy to it. To her amazement, the petals seemed to perk up, the stem straightening. He had her do the same to a lizard with an injured leg, and she watched as the small creature which had been dragging its limb suddenly scurried away whole. But there was a cost. Every time she used this power, it left her drained, her own energy depleted. It took a toll like drawing water from a very deep well. Gochin warned her that to heal a great injury would require a great sacrifice of her own vitality. To heal the dying, he explained with grim certainty, might even demand a life for a life. Their days took on a new rhythm. They were no longer just two survivors, but a teacher and an apprentice. An old Apache chief and a young Irish girl, bound by a covenant of dust and water, and a power that neither of them fully understood. But the desert could not hide them forever. The smoke from their small cooking fire, no matter how carefully managed, was a signal, and the world of men with its greed, its laws, and its guns was about to come crashing down on their sanctuary. Redemption. Gulch was less a town and more a scab on the face of the desert. It consisted of a single dusty main street, flanked by a dozen wooden buildings, a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, a livery stable, and the sun-bleached office of the town marshal. It was a place for people running from something, or running towards a dream that usually died of thirst before it could be realized. It was into this simmering pot of desperation that Helena O'Connell and Gochin walked. They had no choice. Their meager supplies were gone, and Gochin knew that to heal fully he needed more than roots and rabbit meat. He also needed to learn what had become of his people, and a town, for all its dangers, was a hub of information. Their arrival caused an immediate sensation. A lone white girl, dressed in tattered but clean clothes, walking alongside a tall, imposing Apache chief, was a sight that stopped all activity. Men froze with glasses halfway to their lips in the saloon. The blacksmith, a burly man named Matthew Cole, let his hammer fall silent. Women pulled their children close, peering with suspicion from behind curtains. Helena felt their stares like physical blows. The whispers started immediately slithering through the dusty air. "That's an Apache. What's he doing with that girl? Is she a captive or worse? Look at the way he walks. That's no common brave." The front door of the marshal's office opened. A man stepped out, pinning a tin star to his vest. He was tall and lean, with a weary face and eyes that had seen too much. This was Marshal Elias Rowe, a man who maintained order through a palpable sense of exhaustion rather than intimidation. "That's far enough," Rowe said, his voice flat. His hand rested near the Colt at his hip. "State your business." Helena stepped forward, her heart pounding. She had rehearsed this. "Marshal, my name is Helena O'Connell. My family's wagon. We met with sickness east of here. They passed. This man. He found me, helped me survive." It was a dangerous lie, a reversal of the truth, but it was the only story that might prevent a bullet. Rowe's eyes narrowed, flickering between the girl and the chief. He didn't look convinced. "And him? He is a friend," Helena said, her voice firm, surprising herself. Before Rowe could respond, another man emerged from the shade of the general store's porch. He was immaculately dressed for such a dusty place, in a dark waistcoat and polished boots. His face was handsome in a severe way, with cold, calculating eyes and a thin, predatory smile. This was Silas Thorne. His ST brand was burned onto the hides of half the cattle in the territory, and his influence reached far beyond his vast ranch. He owned the land the town was built on, held the mortgage on half the businesses, and had the loyalty of men who were paid to be loyal. "A friend." Thorne's voice was smooth as oiled leather, but carried a clear note of derision. "Miss, I believe you are mistaken. There are no friendly Apache. There are the living and there are the dead. He is unfortunately the former." Gochin stood silent, his posture regal, his gaze fixed on Thorne. There was a flicker of recognition, a tensing in his shoulders that only Helena could see. "Now, Silas," Marshal Rowe said, a weary edge to his voice. "Let's not be hasty." "Hasty?" Thorne laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Elias, this savage, is Chiricahua. His kind burned the Miller homestead last spring. They stole cattle from the Double T just a month ago. His presence here is a threat, a spark in a tinderbox." Helena saw the flicker in Gochin's eyes again. He recognized the name Silas Thorne. The pieces began to click into place in her mind. The ambush. Men who were not soldiers, ranchers. A cold dread washed over her. These were the men. Thorne was the man who had left Gochin for dead. "He's done nothing wrong," Helena insisted, stepping protectively in front of Gochin. "He needs medicine and food." Her defiance seemed to amuse Thorne. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "The girl has spirit. Perhaps she's been out in the sun too long. Marshal, for the good of the town, I suggest you lock him up until the army can be notified." "On what charge?" Rowe asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "Vagrancy. Trespassing. Being an Apache on a Tuesday." "Take your pick," Thorne said, with a dismissive wave. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The townsfolk were murmuring, their fear being fanned into anger by Thorne's words. A man near the saloon shouted, "He's right, Marshal. Put him in a cell." Just then a new voice cut through the noise. "Perhaps we should let science, not superstition, be our guide." Dr. Alastair Finch stepped out of his small office next to the blacksmith's. He was a man in his late 40s, with spectacles perched on his nose and an air of academic curiosity that seemed out of place on the frontier. He was a man of logic and medicine, and he trusted only what he could observe. The girl says he's a friend. Doctor, Finch continued, wiping his hands on a cloth. And she is clearly an American citizen in need of aid. The man appears injured but calm. Let us not descend into mob rule before we've even had a chance to diagnose the situation. Finch's words, calm and rational, seemed to cool the heated atmosphere slightly. He was respected, if not entirely understood by the townsfolk. Marshal Rowe, seeing an opportunity to de-escalate, nodded. All right, the Indian can stay. But he's my responsibility. One wrong move, one threatening glance, and he's in a cell. Understood. He looked directly at Gochin. Gochin gave a slow, deliberate nod. And the girl? Thorne added, his eyes still on Helena. She'll need a place to stay. Mrs. Gable at the general store could use some help. A young lady shouldn't be unchaperoned. The offer sounded benevolent, but it felt like a cage being built around her. Thorne wanted her close. He wanted to know what she knew. Helena had no choice but to agree. She and Gochin were separated. She was led to the general store, a world of calico fabrics and tins of beans, under the watchful, gossiping eye of Beatrice Gable. Gochin was taken by Dr. Finch, who, out of medical curiosity, offered to properly examine his wound. As Helena swept the dusty floorboards of the store, she could feel Silas Thorne's presence like a shadow over the whole town. He hadn't recognized Gochin, not yet. To him, one Apache looked much like another, but Gochin had recognized him. They were in the lion's den, and the lion was circling, sniffing the air, sensing that something was amiss in his perfectly controlled kingdom. The fragile peace wouldn't last. Helena knew it, and as she swept, she felt that strange warmth tingling in her hands, a power she was terrified to use, but knew with chilling certainty that she would have to. Life in redemption. Gulch was a tightrope walk. Helena worked from sunup to sundown, in Gable's general store, stocking shelves, weighing flour, and enduring the constant barrage of suspicion from the townsfolk. She was the Indian girl, a pariah pitied by some and reviled by most. Beatrice Gable, a woman whose piety was matched only by her love of gossip, treated Helena like a charity case and a ticking bomb, watching her every move. Silas Thorne was a constant, unnerving presence. He would visit the store under the pretense of business, his cold eyes dissecting her, trying to glean her secrets. "You're a long way from home, Miss O'Connell," he'd say, his voice a silken threat. "A girl like you needs protection. You should be careful of the company you keep." Helena's only solace were her brief, supervised meetings with Gochin. Dr. Finch, fascinated by the chief's remarkable recovery, had given him a room in the back of his clinic. "The tissue regeneration is unlike anything I've ever seen," Finch would mutter, peering at the scar on Gochin's chest through his spectacles. "By all rights, this man should be dead." The infection alone. During their meetings, Gochin spoke to Helena in low tones, a mix of Apache and his growing English. He urged patience. "The wolf circles before it strikes. We must know the ground." He was studying the town, the people, the power dynamics. He saw that Thorne was not just a rancher. He was the town's puppeteer, and Marshal Rowe was a puppet whose strings were tangled in debt and fear. The power in Helena's hands remained a secret, a tingling warmth she felt whenever she was anxious or emotional. She tried to suppress it, terrified of what would happen if it were revealed. Then came the fever. It started with the children, as it so often did. A lung fever, what the doctor called pneumonia. It struck fast and hard. The first to fall ill was Annie, the 9-year-old daughter of the blacksmith Matthew Cole. Cole was a good man, a widower, whose daughter was his entire world. He doted on her, and the town had a soft spot for the quiet, hard-working man and his bright, pig-tailed girl. Dr. Finch did everything he could. He administered quinine-applied cold compresses and sat by her bedside day and night. But Annie only got worse. Her breathing became a shallow, liquid-filled struggle. Her fever raged, sending her into delirium. After 3 days, a grim-faced Dr. Finch pulled Matthew Cole aside. "I've done all I can, Matthew," he said softly, his scientific certainty shattered by the reality of his failure. "Her lungs are filling. It's in God's hands now." The news spread through the town like a death knell. Matthew Cole was inconsolable, his huge frame racked with sobs that echoed from his small house behind the smithy. That evening, Helena was sweeping the porch of the general store when she saw Cole stumble out of his house, his face a mask of utter despair. He looked to the sky as if cursing it. The sight of his raw paternal grief broke through Helena's fear. She saw her own father, helpless as her mother's life faded away. She saw herself alone by a wagon, wishing for a power she didn't have. But now she did. Making a decision that would alter her destiny, she dropped the broom and walked across the street. She ignored Mrs. Gable's sharp, "Helena, you come back here." She found Gotchin in his room, sitting silently in the dark. She didn't need to explain. He looked at her face and understood. "You are sure?" he asked, his voice grave. "The cost is great." "I can't let her die," Helena whispered, her hands trembling. "I can't." "Then you do not go as Helena O'Connell, the store girl," he instructed, his eyes intense. "You go as Easy Nadlehe. Let the spirit guide your hands. Do not think, feel." She slipped out the back of the clinic and went to the blacksmith's house. She knocked softly. Matthew Cole opened the door, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice thick with grief. "Please," Helena said, her voice shaking but firm. "Let me see her. I might be able to help." Cole looked at her, this strange girl who everyone whispered about. He saw not a threat, but a flicker of desperate hope. He had nothing left to lose. He stepped aside. The room was hot and smelled of sickness. Annie was lying on the small bed, her chest rising and falling in violent, shuddering gasps. Her skin was pale and slick with sweat. Dr. Finch was there, slumped in a chair, defeated. He looked up in surprise as Helena entered. "Child, there's nothing to be done," he said wearily. Helena didn't answer him. She walked to the bed, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. She remembered Goshin's words. "Feel." She closed her eyes and placed her hands gently on Annie's small chest. At first, nothing happened. Then she let go of her fear, her doubt, and the whispers of the town. She focused on the little girl, on the rattling in her lungs, on the raging fire of the fever. She imagined cool, clean water flowing where the sickness was. She pictured a gentle breeze clearing the congestion. She poured all her will, all her compassion into her touch. A profound warmth spread from her palms. It was stronger than ever before a deep, resonant energy that made the oil lamp on the bedside table flicker. Dr. Finch sat up, his eyes wide behind his spectacles. Matthew Cole held his breath. Under her hands, the violent shuddering in Annie's chest began to calm. The rasping gasps eased, becoming deeper, more regular breaths. It was as if a storm was passing. The intense heat of the fever radiating from the girl's body began to subside. Helena felt the sickness as a living thing, a dark, clinging tar, and she felt her own energy, pushing it out, dissolving it. The effort was immense. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The room began to spin. She felt a deep, hollowing exhaustion, as if her own life force was being siphoned away. She was drawing water from that deep well, and the bucket was very, very heavy. After what could have been 5 minutes or an hour, she swayed, her strength gone. She stumbled back, and Matthew Cole caught her. At that exact moment, Annie Cole coughed. It was a deep, chest-clearing cough, not the weak rattle from before. Her eyes fluttered open. They were no longer glazed with fever, but were clear and aware. "Papa," she whispered, her voice, weak but lucid. Matthew Cole let out a choked cry and rushed to his daughter's side, gathering her in his arms and weeping with relief. Dr. Finch stood his face, a perfect picture of astonishment. He walked over to Annie, his hands trembling as he checked her pulse, then placed his ear to her chest. He listened, then listened again. He looked up, his gaze meeting Helena's. The skepticism was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated awe. "Her lungs," he stammered, his scientific mind struggling to find a framework for what he had just witnessed. "They're clear. The fever is gone. It's a miracle." The word hung in the air, potent and dangerous. Helena, leaning heavily on the wall for support, knew that in healing Annie Cole she had done something irreversible. She had revealed her secret. She had saved a life, but she may have just condemned herself. The whispers about the Indian girl were about to turn into shouts about something far more terrifying to the people of Redemption Gulch, a witch. And Silas Thorne, she knew, would be the first to light the fire. News of Annie Cole's recovery swept through Redemption Gulch like a prairie fire. What should have been a moment of communal joy quickly curdled into suspicion and fear. Dr. Finch, a man of science, was unable to explain it. He spoke of spontaneous remission and the power of suggestion, but his words were hollow. He had seen what he had seen. Matthew Cole, however, was a true believer. He told everyone who would listen that Helena O'Connell had saved his daughter with a touch from God himself. The town was split. Some, like the Coles, saw Helena as a saint. Others, their fear stoked by ignorance, saw her as the devil. And Silas Thorne saw her as a threat to his authority. A saint or a witch, it didn't matter. She represented a power he did not control. Thorne began to work his poison. "It's unnatural," he'd say to the men in the saloon. "An Apache charm, a dark magic she learned in the desert. First she heals, then she'll curse. You mark my words." He preyed on their superstitions, his words watering the seeds of their deepest anxieties. He focused his attention on Marshal Elias Rowe. Thorne owned the note on Rowe's small failed ranch back east. He had paid off the marshal's gambling debts. Rowe was a man trapped in a cage of another's making, and Thorne rattled the bars whenever he pleased. "That chief he's been spending time with," Thorne said to Rowe one evening in the marshal's office, pouring them both a whiskey. "I've been doing some checking. The army patrols are looking for a Chiricahua war chief responsible for a dozen raids. Goes by the name Gochin." Rowe looked up, his weary face pale. "You think it's him?" "I'm certain of it," Thorne lied smoothly. "And now he has this girl, this witch, under his spell. They're a danger to us all, Elias. You have to act." "I have no proof," Rowe countered, his voice weak. "The girl saved the Cole child." "Did she?" Thorne leaned in his voice a venomous whisper. "Or did she place a hex on the girl in the first place, only to remove it to gain our trust? It's an old trick. The town is on edge. They're looking to you for protection. Or are you on the Apache's side now?" The threat was clear. Rowe's loyalty, his very position, was being called into question. The following week, Thorne made his move. He paid 2 of his ranch hands, rough men named Cobb and Finley, a hefty bonus. In the dead of night, they rustled 20 head of Thorn's own prime cattle, driving them into the canyons north of town. But before they did, they made sure to leave a trail that led directly to the secluded spot by the creek where Gochin often went to meditate. As a final touch, they dropped a distinctive hand-carved piece of juniper, a trinket they had seen Gochin whittling near the broken fence. The next morning, Thorn rode into town, his face a mask of theatrical fury. "Rustlers, they hit me last night. My best stock," he roared, ensuring the whole town could hear. He led Marshal Rowe and a posse of half-drunk, angry townsmen out to his ranch. The evidence was precisely where Cobb and Finley had left it: the tracks, the broken fence, and the damning piece of juniper wood. "It's the Apache," a man in the posse spat. Thorn was right. The mob, their fear now given a target, rode back to Redemption Gulch with blood in their eyes. They stormed Dr. Finch's clinic, dragging Gochin out into the street. The chief offered no resistance, his face a stoic, unreadable mask. He knew this was a play, and he needed to see the final act. "String him up," someone yelled. A rope was thrown over the thick branch of a cottonwood tree. Helena, hearing the commotion from the store, ran out into the street. She saw Gochin bound and stoic, and the hate-filled faces of the men surrounding him. She ran to his side, trying to shield him. "He didn't do this. He was here all night. Dr. Finch, tell them." "Doctor," Finch pushed his way through the crowd. "It's true, Marshal. He never left my clinic." A man of science. Thorn sneered from his horse, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Are you prepared to say you watched him every single second of the night, Doctor? Or is it possible he slipped out while you slept? Is it possible this witch girl is clouding your judgment too?" Finch faltered, unable to lie. He had, of course, slept. The crowd surged, their fury reignited. Marshal Rowe, his face ashen, knew he had lost control. His debt to Thorn, his fear of the mob, it all came crashing down on him. I have to take him into custody," he stammered, grabbing Gochin's arm. "Custody?" Thorn laughed. "There's no need for a trial. We have the evidence. We have the will of the people. This is frontier justice." But Thorn had a more sinister plan than a simple hanging. He wanted to break not just the chief, but the girl's spirit as well. He wanted to eliminate the source of the power he couldn't control. "Wait," Thorn commanded, raising a hand. The crowd fell silent. His eyes found Helena. "Perhaps there's a way to settle this. The girl has a gift, does she not? A gift of healing." He dismounted, walking slowly towards her. "If your Apache friend is innocent, then let's see some proof. Let's see your power." He nodded to Cobb and Finley. They grabbed Helena, their rough hands, bruising her arms. They dragged her towards the center of the street. "What are you doing?" she cried, struggling against them. "A test of faith, little witch," Thorn said, his smile chilling her to the bone. He pulled a long, wicked-looking knife from a sheath on his belt. "Let's see if you can heal yourself." Before anyone could react, Thorn lashed out, not with the blade, but with the heavy pommel of the knife. He struck Helena hard on the side of the head. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain, and then darkness swallowed her whole. She crumpled to the ground, unconscious. "Take the Indian to the old mission ruins," Thorn ordered the marshal, his voice cold as steel. "Lock him in the cellar. If the girl wakes up, and her magic is as strong as they say, she'll know where to find him." He looked down at Helena's still form. "And if she doesn't, well, the coyotes have to eat too." He was setting a trap. He was using Helena as bait, and the wounded, enraged town as his weapon. Gochin was taken away, leaving Helena lying in the dust, the so-called miracle worker, bleeding and broken in the heart of a town that no longer knew the difference between redemption and revenge. Pain was the first thing to return a dull, throbbing drumbeat inside her skull. Helena's eyelids fluttered open to the concerned face of Dr. Alistair Finch, his spectacles perched on his nose. She was on a cot in his clinic. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and blood. "Easy, child," the doctor said softly, pressing a cool cloth to her head. "Thorn gave you a nasty concussion." Memory returned in a sickening flood. The angry mob, Thorn's cruel smile, the glint of the knife pommel. "Gochin!" She gasped, trying to sit up. "Where did they take him?" "Thorn has him at the old San Tadeo mission." "Ruins," Finch confirmed, his voice laced with shame. "He's using him as bait, Helena. The whole town is caught in his web of lies." Matthew Cole, the blacksmith whose daughter Helena had saved, stood in the doorway, his large frame a bastion of silent support. "Not all of us," Cole said, his voice a low rumble. "Some of us see the truth. We'll help you." Looking at the two men, the man of science and the man of iron, Helena felt a flicker of hope. Her head swam, but a fierce resolve burned through the pain. She knew what she had to do. The power within her, the Izie Nadlehe, was a deep well. After healing Annie, it had been nearly dry, but now, after hours of forced rest, she could feel it slowly refilling. Closing her eyes, she reached out with her spirit, searching for the calm, steady presence she had come to know so well. She found it a faint, distant echo. He was alive. He was waiting. A desperate plan was forged in the twilight hours, built not on brute force, but on the element of surprise. Dr. Finch would create a diversion, a chemical mixture that would billow thick, acrid smoke, making it seem his clinic was ablaze. In the ensuing chaos, Matthew Cole would ensure the horses of Thorn's men would not be available for pursuit. Helena's role was the most dangerous. She had to get to the mission, not to fight, but to confront the man whose soul held the key to the town's fate, Marshal Elias Rowe. As a cry of "Fire!" cut through the night, the plan launched into motion. Townsfolk spilled into the street, their attention fixed on the smoke pouring from behind the clinic. Helena, her head still throbbing, slipped into the shadows and ran. The 2-mile journey to the mission was a breathless ordeal. The ruins stood skeletal against the starlight, a place of crumbling adobe and forgotten prayers. Thorn was there, standing on the steps of the old chapel, flanked by his cruelest ranch hands, Cobb and Finley. And beside him, looking like a ghost caught in the torchlight, was Marshal Rowe. Helena didn't hide. She walked directly into the clearing, her small figure casting a long, defiant shadow. Thorn smiled a victor's smile. "The little witch awakens," he sneered. "Come for your savage friend. I've come for the law." Helena said, her voice clear and steady, her eyes fixed only on the marshal. "Marshal Rowe, you swore an oath to justice. Yet you stand here in service of a liar and a murderer." Rowe flinched. "Hold your tongue, girl. You're addled." "Am I?" Helena took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "I know that Silas Thorn led the ambush that left Gochin for dead. He did it to stop Gochin from attending a peace council that would have threatened Thorn's illegal land grabs. Ask him about the silver inlaid saddle he rides. Gochin remembers it well. Thorn's smile vanished. Delusional fantasies. Seize her." But Rowe stood frozen, his face a battlefield of doubt and fear. The detail about the saddle was too specific, a piece of a puzzle he had long refused to solve. "You have a choice," Marshal Helena pleaded, her voice softening. "You can be Thorn's puppet, or you can be the man this town desperately needs you to be. The man who stands for the truth." "The truth is, she's a witch," Cobb snarled, raising his rifle. "Put it down," Rowe commanded, his voice cracking with authority he hadn't felt in years. He took a half-step, shielding Helena. "You are finished here, Elias Thorne," said his voice, deadly calm as he drew his own pistol. "I am the law now." He aimed the gun not at Roe, but directly at Helena. It's a shame. Such a spirited little thing. In that split second, Helena acted. She lunged, not away from the gun, but towards the marshal. She grabbed his arm, her small hand clamping onto his wrist, just as his own hand instinctively went to draw his Colt. She didn't push or pull. She unleashed the full concentrated force of the easy Nadlehe directly into him. It was not a wave of healing. It was a tidal wave of truth. Marshal Rowe cried out, his body seizing as if struck by lightning. Through her touch, he saw and felt everything in a single overwhelming instant. He felt Helena's selfless compassion during her 40-day vigil. He felt the pure, desperate hope as she healed Annie Cole. Then the mirror turned on him. He felt the crushing weight of his own compromises, the shame of his debts to Thorne, the slow, agonizing decay of his own honor. He saw the path he was on ending in a lonely, dishonorable grave. It was a spiritual cataclysm. His gun, half drawn, clattered to the ground. His eyes wide with a terrible clarifying agony stared at Thorne. "You!" he gasped, his voice choked with the poison of his own complicity. Thorne, stunned by this bizarre turn, hesitated for a fatal second. It was all the opening needed. From the shadows of the crumbling bell tower, an arrow hissed through the night. It didn't kill. It struck with surgical precision, pinning the sleeve of Thorne's gun hand to the thick wooden door frame behind him. Thorne screamed in pain and shook his pistol, firing harmlessly into the sky. Gochin emerged from the darkness, a figure of righteous vengeance. The cellar's lock had been old and rusted a trifle for him. He had been waiting, trusting his student. He held his bow, another arrow already nocked. Seeing their leader disabled, and the legendary Apache chief appearing like a wraith, Cobb and Finley fled into the night. Silas Thorne, pinned and defeated, was trapped. Marshal Rowe, trembling from the spiritual storm he had just endured, slowly bent down. He picked up his fallen gun, his hand no longer shaking, and pointed it squarely at Thorne's chest. The law, broken and remade, had finally returned to Redemption Gulch. The aftermath was not a clean slate. Silas Thorne was imprisoned, his crimes laid bare not only by Marshal Rowe's tearful cathartic confession, but by evidence Matthew Cole and Dr. Finch helped unearth from his doctored account books. Thorne's empire of fear crumbled, but the seeds of hatred he had planted in the town didn't wither overnight. Prejudice is a stubborn weed. Some townsfolk still looked at Helena with fear, whispering the word witch when she passed. They could not comprehend her power, so they condemned it. But others, the Coles' Dr. Finch and a newly resolute Marshal Rowe, saw her as a hero. They saw not magic, but a profound courage and compassion that had forced them all to look into their own souls. Redemption Gulch had been given a chance to live up to its name, and the process would be slow and painful. Gochin, his name cleared, was a chief without a tribe. Word eventually reached them that the remnants of his scattered band had journeyed north to join other clans believing him dead. He was free, but he was alone, a living ghost in a changing land. A few weeks later, as the first signs of autumn began to touch the high desert, Helena stood with Gochin on the bluff overlooking the town. The choice before her was stark. She could stay carving out a life under the protection of her few friends, forever marked as an outsider. Or she could leave, disappearing into the vast anonymity of the West. "What will you do, Izie Nadlehe Gochin?" asked his gaze on the distant mountains. "I am not a healer of bodies, am I?" Helena replied, looking at her own hands. They looked like the same hands that had buried her parents, but they felt entirely different. That day, with the marshal, I didn't heal him. I showed him the truth. The deepest wounds are in the spirit, Gotchin said. To heal the spirit, you must show it its own reflection. It is the most painful medicine. Helena finally understood. Her power wasn't about mending flesh or curing fever. That was merely a side effect. Its true purpose, the sacred power she had earned through her 40-day trial, was the power of empathy, an empathy so profound it could force a person to confront the truth of their own heart. It could heal, but it could also break. It was a key that could unlock a soul for good or ill. "I can't stay here," she said, a quiet certainty in her voice. "And I cannot go with you. My path is between the worlds." Gotchin nodded, a sad, proud smile touching his lips. The changing spirit does not belong to the rock or to the river. It belongs to the wind that blows between them. She did not become a legend of the gunfighters or the gold miners. Her story was a different kind, one whispered around campfires and told to children in the lonely homesteads of the territory. They said there was a young woman who walked the frontier, belonging to no one and to everyone. They called her the soul healer. They said she would appear in towns torn apart by greed and hatred, in mining camps poisoned by disputes in settlements on the brink of war with the native tribes. She never stayed long. She would find the heart of the conflict, the source of the pain, and she would touch one person. A corrupt sheriff, a hateful preacher, a vengeful rancher. And through that one touch, she would hold up a mirror to the community's soul, forcing it to see its own ugliness, its own capacity for redemption. She was never seen with a weapon. Her only companions were a quiet, dignified Apache elder who walked a pace behind her, her guide, her guardian, her first friend, and the sacred, terrible power in her hands. She was Helena O'Connell, the girl who bathed a dying chief for 40 days, and in doing so, became a living legend, a testament to the fact that, in the brutal heart of the Wild West, the greatest force for change wasn't violence or vengeance, but the simple, devastating, and miraculous touch of truth. The story of Helena O'Connell isn't just a tale of the Old West. It's a testament to the incredible power of compassion in a world defined by conflict. She faced the choice we all face at some point, to walk away from suffering or to meet it with an open heart. Her 40-day vigil wasn't just about saving a man's life. It was about refusing to let the hate of her time extinguish the humanity within her. The sacred power she received wasn't magic, but the amplified force of empathy itself, the ability to make someone truly feel the consequences of their actions. Her legend reminds us that the greatest changes in the world often start with a single courageous act of kindness. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and the hidden powers of the human spirit moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story that's more than just history. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-life legends from the forgotten corners of the past. What part of Helena's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below.